Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of this week's Q&A, so let's get to it. Next question. Hey Jason, could you explain how a drug-free lifter could go about training effectively for strength/hypertrophy on a 6, maybe 7 day split? If it's possible, what type of routine would I implement, how many sets, reps, etc.? I only ask because I like to train every day as a hobby and would like to try to make some gains while training every day. Thanks. Alright, as a drug-free lifter, the only reason you would ever want to train with actual weight training more than 3 to 4 days a week is going to be for peak power, which means your 1 rep max is learning the neural efficiency of max lifts. So if you're trying to gain size, you're not going to gain a single ounce more muscle mass training more than 3 to 4 days a week without drugs in the mix. So drop the hypertrophy in. The only reason would be to increase something like your max squat, your max bench press, or whatever, and that would mean very, very low volume, like Bulgarian light style training. So that would mean coming in and hitting a training max every day with maybe a back off set of about 3 reps with 80 to 85% of your max. And again, you're focusing on maximum strength and peak power by doing that. If that's not what you're trying to do and you're wanting to actually make the most overall strength through a broader category and more overall size, just come in and train full body 3 days a week, or maybe an upper, lower, or push pull 4 days a week. The other 3 to 4 days a week, you don't need to be weightlifting at all. They're not going to help you with your goals. So if you want to actually train on those days because you just enjoy training, I'm going to recommend you dedicate those other 3 to 4 days to cardio or conditioning of some type, or GPP work. So your general physical preparedness. Come in and do barbell complexes, do farmer's walks, do sled drags, do some sort of actual conditioning or general physical preparedness work if your goals are overall performance and you actually want to be physically active 7 days a week, or just do less cardio on your off days. But actually weightlifting for hypertrophy that many days a week is not going to help you, and it might even hinder you to some extent if you're a completely clean lifter. And again, as far as strength goes, you've got to limit the volume. If you're going to train that frequently, even for peak power, that means Bulgarian light style training. Don't come in and actually do a bunch of metabolically fatiguing work like high rep stuff. It is going to be potentially counterproductive. So that's what I'm going to recommend to you to do. One of those two methods, and I would lean, if you're not going to compete in powerlifting or Olympic lifting, I'm not going to lean towards the Bulgarian light. I'm going to push you more in the direction of general physical preparedness, or doing sub-maximal style work like greasing the groove methods, or even the sub-maximal deadlift method that I made a video on a couple years back. All right, next question. The UK has recently said that female soldiers will be allowed to fight on the front line. What would be your argument to that? I have argued that due to physiological limitations, it could lead to the lowering of standards. I believe there is a place for females in the forces, but not the front line. I am losing this battle to the Libtards, so your articulate opinion would be appreciated. Haha. Well, the first thing that you need to understand, this is stuff I cover on my other channel kind of, that the far leftists and social justice warriors are actually created to destabilize and weaken countries. So the idea that they would actually want to weaken your military readiness comes as no surprise, and you're not going to argue with those people because the true believers of that sort of belief actually want your countries to fall. So they want your country to be weaker, so weakening the military would be ideal for them. You're not going to convince them otherwise. Now, for those who are more moderate in that and they're willing to listen, the argument could be made, and I would agree, if women have the full propensity and skills and physical abilities to fight on the front lines, I don't have a problem with it. Now, there are reasons to not put them into special forces units, but that's a whole nother issue. When you start talking, again, like SAS for you guys in England, probably not ideal. But as far as general infantry, I would make the argument, as long as the standards are not lowered for them, if they can physically pass the actual standards, the requirements, with no handicap given, no advantages given to women, and without lowering the overall standards, then I think it's acceptable. It's perfectly fine. And that's where you need to leave it, because that will resolve the problem in and of itself. You're going to find very, very, very few women, even athletic women, are going to pass those standards that most militaries have in place for that. And if they can pass it, then more power to them. Now, we're not talking about guerrillas. We're not talking about insurgencies here. That's a different topic. We're talking about regular military. You're talking about organized regulars, not irregulars. Yeah, it's going to be a problem because most women, even athletes, are going to fail to meet the physical requirements, even if they're in shape. So again, if they can pass it though, then I think it's totally fair to let them in. I'm going to actually agree with them on that if they can pass the standards. But if you start lowering the standards to allow women in, you are basically destroying your military readiness and hurting your actual primary force purely for the purpose of being politically correct and so-called equality. And that is really a problem, because if equality exists in all ways, then you don't need to lower standards ever, is the counter argument you could make them. So again, as long as the standards aren't lowered, it's not a problem. That will weed out the real problem, which is women who aren't physically suited for the role getting in. There's going to be a few exceptions to the rule, and by all means, if they can handle it, then put them in. But you need to, for certain psychological purposes, you do need to keep them out of special forces units like your SAS. But that's a whole nother tactical topic, not something I can cover on the scope of this channel. So the real issue is just, are they physically athletic enough for the role? And don't lower the standards. All right, next question. Jason, I have run your full body program successfully for a while now and would like to change it up a bit, either your linear hypertrophy or linear periodization. Which one would you recommend for me if I want to recomposition? Time is not an issue. Thanks, brother. It's going to depend on your experience level and where you are. Where's your strength at? Where's your overall development at? Because those are two different programs. My linear periodization program is for intermediate athletes. Most lifters are not intermediates. Most people who've even been lifting a while still never reach the true intermediate phase. Maybe 10 to 15% of lifters, maybe 20% ever even reach the intermediate phase. Tons of gym bros don't ever reach it. So look where your strength is. If you aren't able to rep 315 pounds on the squat, 400 pounds on the deadlift, and 225 on the bench press, and if you want those in international units, look at it in terms of plates. 2 full plates aside on the bench, 3 full plates aside on the squat, 4 full plates aside on the deadlift, 4 reps. If you can't do those, run the linear hypertrophy program. But if you can do those, then run the off-season intermediate linear periodization program. It's pretty straightforward. It's like, how strong are you? What's your work capacity like? That's what's going to determine which of those two you need to run. And once you reach that point, obviously, if you run the hypertrophy program and you reach that threshold, then go ahead and jump over to the intermediate program. And the intermediate program might actually serve you for life, because again, most lifters don't ever reach advanced status, even with a few years of training. So just take it from there. All right, next question. I can make a maximum of 12 reps with 70 pounds, but 6 reps with 90 pounds. This means that with a 70 pounds barbell, it's kind of hard to understand what you wrote here, brother. My ORM, which is, I guess, going to be estimated 1 rep max, is 99 pounds. But when I rep with 90 pounds, my estimated 1 rep max is 108. Which could be the cause for my estimate being so much higher with the higher weight. The exercise is behind the neck press. All right, basically to summarize, this guy's plugged in his maxes into a 1 rep max calculator, and based upon for his overhead press, or I guess his behind the neck press, that his 12 reps with 70 pounds says he should have a 99 pound max. But his 6 rep max with 90 pounds says he should have 108. So what's going on here? Well, simply put, the further you get away from your 1 rep max, meaning the more reps you do, the more inaccurate 1 rep max calculators are. Meaning one guy's 12 rep max might show him to be below his true max, and another's might put it really, really high. It depends on what your muscle fiber distribution looks like and what you train more. Guys who are better at high reps, slightly better at high reps genetically, who train a lot of high reps, when they calculate their max, they might find their max to be off tremendously. Like sometimes they'll estimate their 1 rep max on a lift to be 100 pounds heavier than they can actually do when they get there. Whereas in the guys who, again, a little more fast twitch dominant, who actually train, so the other extreme, who actually train low reps a lot more, are going to get a far more accurate 1 rep max estimate off their calculations with lower reps. And in your case, it sounds like you are stronger on your low reps. You probably train your low reps more often, so you're getting a more accurate representation. When you have two different numbers to work with to estimate your max, use the lower number. Meaning if all you had was the 12 rep max to go off of, because you've only been doing 12 rep sets, that's all you have to go off of. But since you have an actual 6 rep max, half the reps closer to your 1 rep max to estimate it off of, that one is probably going to be more accurate. That's the one that you need to use. So again, those tools are just there as a baseline to start getting you in the ballpark. But the further away you get from the max, the further off they can be either direction depending upon a number of different factors. So use the 6 rep max since you have one to work with. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I recently have had an injury and am just starting to get back into training after a 1 year break. Since you also had a longer break in your training, how did you stay motivated after losing so much of your progress? What kept you going? It's going to be very individual from person to person. For you, I don't know how extensive your problem was. For me, I couldn't even walk. So I had to relearn to walk again. I had to relearn to squat holding the back of a chair. I had to learn to do one push-up again. So for me, the motivation was that I didn't want to die. I didn't want to roll over and die. I saw myself as a weak, pathetic pussy at that point, and I hated myself for it because I felt that I had lost everything. And what people need to realize, I never actually regained everything. The strength I was at when I was 29, 30 years old, even after coming completely off gear, I never actually reached those numbers again, even in sanctioned competition later in my 30s. So perspective there, in my case, I made a fall that I never fully recovered from. So what kept me motivated was the fact that I didn't want to be weak, I didn't want to be sick anymore, and I didn't want to roll over and die. These motivations are individual, and I think for me, the words that struck for me, my father, who played in a lot of ways a very negative role in my life, but also a positive one, he used to really push me hard as a kid. My father, again, I told you guys stories on my firearm channel of what he did to teach me to fight as a child, but my father also was the type who he threw me in a swimming pool in the deep end of a pool and screamed sink or swim when I was a kid. And when he saw me sick in bed, he came to visit me, and keep in mind, he didn't help me out. This is not someone who gave me money. My father's worth millions. He didn't give me a penny. He looked at me when I was sick and told me, basically that I needed to warrior the fuck up and pull myself up by the goddamn bootstraps. And then, he kind of left. That's what he told me. So for me, I realized that maybe my dad was right, that in my case, I had lost everything physically. I had to start back over from scratch. And I realized that if I wanted to survive, if I wanted to do anything at all, that I was going to have to warrior up and pull myself up by the bootstraps. And that's what I did. And my motivation was partially, I think at that point, part of that was just to even spite my father. But you know what? The thing is, what you need to realize is that your individual motivation for getting yourself back into training after a downtime is going to have to be individual. You're going to have to reach inside and find for yourself either some hatred or some desire to live, some desire to excel, something that motivates you personally. And I can't tell you what that is. In my case, it was a very negative motivation. It was hatred. It was self-loathing that drove me out, because I saw myself as pathetic at that point, and I realized I couldn't live that way. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror that way. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to build my strength and things back up to the point to where I can live with myself, because I want to live. I don't want to roll over and die, and I sure don't want to hate myself. So that was kind of my motivation, was a very negative one. But for someone else, you might find a positive motivation to be more successful there. You just got to find it for yourself. All right, next question. Do you really need to keep the body guessing, or is that a myth? It's a statement that's partially true, but the way it's worded and the way it's approached is usually a method by ignorant-ass bodybuilders who've never opened a physiology book. And so they understand that, the body, if it's not stressed in some new way, doesn't adapt. Like, your body will only adapt when it has to, when you give it a stressor that it's not adapted to. So they think then, and that means that you got to just make crazy changes. But the truth is, by keeping the body guessing, no, your body doesn't need to guess. Your brain is the only thing in your body capable of actually thinking. your muscles, your peripheral nervous system, it's not actually capable of being confused or physically capable of guessing anything. Your brain does all of that. So as far as stressing it goes, you just need to give it further adaptation, meaning if you can add a single pound or a single kilo to a weight you're using, you've now stimulated new adaptation. That's it. There's no more confusion. There's no more guessing required to stimulate further adaptation. If with a given weight you can do one more rep, or even add a set later, or even a few rep set, you've now stimulated new adaptation. That's it. It's that simple. Progressive overload is actually what they mean when they say you got to keep the body guessing. You just have to make the body work a fraction, 0.5% harder than it had to work before, and then it will adapt to it over time. It doesn't mean that you need to confuse it. And that's the real problem, is that people have this idea that you've got some muscle confusion going on, that you need to stress the body in some really bizarre, unusual way to keep it guessing, when the truth is all you have to do is subject the body to something that is just a fraction harder than something it has previously been subjected to. And if you do that chronically, you do that several times, like you've added that extra pound to the dumbbell or the barbell several times, your body will adapt to it. Once you've done it a few times, it's going to say, oh, I have to change. This is a new stressor. I have to adapt. It can be a very, very small change. A single rep added, a single pound added will actually force the body to adapt over time. So they're right in the sense of you have to give it new stimulation, slightly more work than it's had to do before, but it doesn't have to be a crazy confusion. It doesn't have to be something bizarre and off the wall to stress it. It just has to be something more than it's been challenged with previously. So hopefully that clarifies that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.